On September 11, 2001, at 8:46 a.m., America experienced an event that would pave the way for the start of a new era in American history. From airport security to international war, we still see and experience the effects from 9/11 every day. This is a day that will absolutely never be forgotten.
The moment that 9/11 happened, it was certain that America would never be the same again, but the real questions became, what happens next, and how do we as a nation deal with this and remember this time? The first question becomes, what should we as people remember and memorialize?
As people of the United States, something that should be important to us to remember as a nation and memorialize is the tragic events or moments that shaped the country to be who we are today. It is tragic events like 9/11 that have brought American citizens together in times of tragedy and triumph.
It is the tragic but important moments like 9/11 that we always need to remember so we can prevent them from happening again, but just as well, it is those moments that we need to remember to memorialize all the people who not only lost their lives, but the ones who bravely helped the people suffering in this time of need. Following those statements, do you believe that 9/11 has been memorialized properly?
My family experienced 9/11 in a different way than most Americans did. My dad is in the military and he worked at the Pentagon from 2000 to 2002. So, he was supposed to be at work the day that the Pentagon was hit. But a large majority of the soldiers he was commanding had to be in the field for training. Knowing that most of his soldiers were going to be gone, he cleared everyone under him, which was hundreds of soldiers, to be able to work from home or in the field that day. So, because none of his soldiers were going to be at the Pentagon, my dad went to a doctor's appointment with my mom while she was pregnant with my brother. My dad had always gone to the ultrasound appointments, but not the usual checkups. This happened to be the only one that he went to the whole time she was pregnant. The day then began to spiral for my family as my parents were in the doctor's waiting room and saw on the TV that the United States was under attack. This brought panic to all my family that had lived in Kentucky at the time and were not aware if my dad was okay or not due to the cell phones not working, because of the mass amounts of people trying to use them. For hours, some of my family had to face the unknowing truth. Was my dad alive and okay? This also brought to question, if he was okay, then what's next? Would he have to be deployed? Was he going to have to leave right away? And how bad would the events to occur after this attack going to be? This experience was difficult for my family. However, this helps to put into perspective what the families that had loved ones that did die that day had to go through when waiting for the fate of their loved ones. Thankfully, my family came out very lucky, but thousands did not. My mom and dad knew some of the people that died in the Pentagon, and some of them were even their friends. After 9/11, my dad then continued to work in the Pentagon when it was at the beginning of its rebuilding stages, the morning stages, and the initial impacts that affected everyone in the building. He then worked at the Pentagon years later for 2010 to 2013. This had then transformed to not only a workplace for the multitudes of people there, but it now meant something bigger as well. They had turned the south wing of the building into a memorial to commemorate the 104 people, soldiers, and civilians that died on September 11, 2001. I believe that the event and occurrence of 9/11 is properly memorialized. To put into perspective, the Pentagon is in the heart of Washington, D.C. It is 6,500,000 square feet, which is the largest floor area of any building in the world. It employs 23,000 soldiers and civilians. If you walked the whole building, it would be equivalent to walking 17 miles. After the events of 9/11, they turned the outside of the Pentagon into a memorial. The memorial contains granite units or benches which contains the victims' names, ages, and locations at the time of the attack. They are categorized by the date that the victims were born, and the units are pointing in two different directions. One representing the passengers on Flight 77, and they face the direction of the plane's approach towards the Pentagon, and the other, representing the victims, faces the direction of the plane's point of impact. There's also a more private memorial in the south wing inside the Pentagon that contains pictures, stories, and personal representations from people who died in the Pentagon that day.
In the exact spot where the Twin Towers were, there is now a memorial that consists of two identical pools with giant waterfalls. Lining the outside edge of the top of the waterfalls, there are bronze plaques to memorialize everyone who lost their life in the attacks that day, as well as 6 people who were killed during a bombing that occurred at the World Trade Center in February of 1993. There is also a 9/11 museum at the site of the memorial that contains pieces of the tower that were spared, and you can hear voice recordings of people making their last calls to loved ones. There are photos and videos from that day and lots of information about not only that day, but also the implications to come. Also at the site of the memorial, there is the survival tree, which is a tree that was found at Ground Zero the day of the attacks. The tree was taken and rehabilitated by the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, and when it was recovered, it was placed back at the memorial as a reminder of survival and rebirth. At the site of the plane crash in Pennsylvania, where the brave passengers and crew were able to stop an attack on the U.S. Capitol, there is a huge memorial to remember the people that were willing to sacrifice their lives to save part of our nation. There is a 93-foot tall concrete building that holds 40 wind chimes, the number of people making up passengers and crew members, and that building is called the Tower of Voices. There are also concrete walls surrounding the field that have the names of the 40 brave people and visitor center for questions and more information. I do believe that these memorials are appropriate because we as a nation acknowledge that we were hurt and we remember all of the people we lost, but we didn't let them die in vain. We grew stronger as a nation and came together to overcome this tragedy.
I believe that we as a nation did an amazing job of coming together and mourning/remembering all of the lives lost from such a tragic event. Each of the different monuments contains the name of every person who lost their lives, as well as something to represent them. All of the monuments also make sure to recognize the help that was not only put into the day of the tragedy, but as well as all the work that has gone towards rebuilding/recovering. Do you believe that the events after 9/11 have been memorialized properly?
I do not think that these events were memorialized properly at all. There are quite a few small memorials for the Iraq War, but not one huge memorial to remember the soldiers who fought for our nation in such a dark time. There were over 30,000 soldiers killed fighting this war, but there is no huge memorial to remind people of this.
I do not believe that the events that occurred as a result of 9/11 are properly memorialized at all. None of the soldiers that have lost their lives as a result of the Iraq War have any sort of significant memorial. A majority of Americans are not even aware of the fact that the Iraq War is still currently taking place. We as a nation have forgotten that the results of 9/11 are still occurring, and we have failed to properly support those that are still deployed overseas and that are fighting for our freedom. I not only believe that the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines should have a proper memorial recognizing those who have lost their lives overseas in this war, but I also believe that we as a nation need to come together and fully support and recognize those who are still fighting for our freedom that we so often take for granted. Understanding the unfortunate truth that the war is still currently going on and knowing that people are still fighting and dying for this country as a result of 9/11 has become a problem. This is due to the fact that most of America has neglected or ignored the sacrifices that have been made to provide them with the freedom that we so often take for granted. Multiple changes need to happen around the United States, and it starts with the media properly and accurately keeping citizens informed of what is happening overseas and within our armed forces. It progresses with the nation coming together in full support and acknowledgement that we are aware of all the sacrifices that they are so unselfishly making as a result of 9/11. Finally, it ends by presenting those who have lost their lives, making the ultimate sacrifice for American freedom with a proper memorial. Just as we have done to honor and pay our respects to the other historic American wars and significant events, this one deserves the same attention.
Although the day that 9/11 occurred has been memorialized properly, it should be just as important, if not more important, to recognize all that has happened as a result of this horrific day. The war still has not ended. The people who died as a result of the war will never have their lives back. Therefore, it is our job now to honor them in the sense of just remembering. If they have been forgotten, that means they died in vain. I would like to believe that as the war comes to an end, then we will ensure that all of our brave soldiers are memorialized in the utmost respectable sense, but it is our job as citizens of the United States of America to make this happen.